Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's draft preview in association with QuinnBet. We're counting down potential draft picks from 32 back to 1. We'll start tonight for those of you watching us live, and thanks very much for tuning in. It's been a while since we've been streaming live on YouTube, on X, on Instagram, and on Twitch, as well as on our own website, irishnflshow.com. We're going to be going back from 32 to 17 tonight. This day next week, that's Easter Monday, we have a bank holiday special for you where we will count down from 16 to 1. So we're going to look at what each team is likely to do, in our opinion, based on their areas of need. And we look then at what the mock drafts published by the leading NFL beat writers and media outlets are saying as well. Like Rory McIlroy standing over a putt, we're not going to waste any time. We're going to get down to business, and hopefully we won't need any playoff holes either. We have a full house tonight, a grand slam of NFL draft expertise, or the greatest collection of spoofers ever known. You choose to lead as appropriate. Shane Brennan, Kieran O'Donovan, Brian O'Leary, Kieran Boyle, and me, Conor Brophy. That's in reverse order of handsomeness. Joining you this evening, you can check in, watch us live just to find out how true or untrue that might be. Fakenews.com. Right, we're going to start with pick 32. That falls to you, Kieran Boyle, with the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. They've been on a roll. Great draft and great free agency last year set the platform for them to ultimately climb to the summit and take home the Lombardi for the second time in 4 years. What's their area of need, do you think, and how are they going to go about addressing it in round one?
Well, on top of that, they got a GM of the century in Mr. Roseman, who's knocked every hit out of the park the last couple of years. You know, I keep reminding everybody that in the Super Bowl, the Chiefs and the Eagles, a lot of their prime players were hits in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round of the draft. So, I like Walter Nolan from Ole Miss for the Eagles in this pick, primarily due to the fact that they lost Williams and they lost Josh Sweat in free agency. When Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss, great runner, great stopper, but he can also play edge as well as D-line. So I think that the versatility there is what they're looking for. Outside chance they may decide to pull a Cooper DeJean and move around and move back or move forward. But with Roseman, you never know what he's going to do. That's what makes him great. But I like Walter Nolan. I think that's the need they have. Obviously, last year they had to address the safety and corner issue. From the playoff being dumped out of the playoffs in 23, and they
it's interesting that you say you never know what he's going to do, because every time he picks, you go, oh yeah, that's the obvious pick, because he knows, he seems to know exactly what he's doing. Like cornerback was the area of need last year, and they got a gem in Cooper DeJean.
They did, but people forget that he moved around to get to Cooper DeJean in the second round, and he also gave up a bunch of third round picks to move around to get some other players too. So he's an absolute genius at what he does. It's no surprise that he's built a great team there. But I think Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss is the need that loss that Milton Williams and Josh Sweat left.
Yeah, Walter Nolan is the consensus pick. 66% of mock drafts over the past week selecting Walter Nolan. Shamar Stewart, another guy in the conversation there, who's also D lineman out of Texas A&M. We move on to Kansas City at 31. Runners up, of course, beaten in the Super Bowl comprehensively, ultimately by the Chiefs. Brian, O-line seems to be an area of need there. Do you see the Chiefs going O-line, or can you see them doing something as they did last year? They ended up moving around, not a huge move, but they traded to get Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, it would be O-line. I think where last year's was maybe the snazzy pick, and maybe the right pick, because obviously we saw the reduction of Worthy over the course of the season. I think they might go back to the trenches this year. I reflect on the Super Bowl and how matched they were in terms of the defense of the Eagles coming at them, and it kind of reminded me very much so of their previous defeat in the Super Bowl against the Buccaneers, where again they were outmatched in the trenches, and that off-season they went very aggressive in trying to pursue players that essentially could put around Mahomes, and I feel like that's where they need to go. Like, I mean, they've got all the attributes, and on another day they would have been winning the Super Bowl probably against a different team. I think it's the offensive line for me. A player I'll throw out any girl might challenge this, he'll probably be gone by the time he hits 31, but Calvin Banks, offensive tackle for Texas, for me, kind of strikes me as that kind of player that would go in there and immediately fit into that team. But I've seen many a mock draft have him go 20 to 30. I'm not sure if he'll be there, but he's the kind of guy that struck me when I was looking at the list of players that would be up there for the Chiefs if he's there. But certainly for me, offensive line won't be a spectacular pick this year. I think that's where they have to build again in the trenches.
Yeah, I like Ursary out of Minnesota. So you got to remember, I mean, we all saw the the crap show that was Joe Thuney at the Super Bowl at left tackle. They've gone through, Wanya Morris, DJ Humphries, Kingsley Suamara. They've all been busts. So they have to get somebody on to protect that blind side of Mahomes. And I like Ursary, big guy, 338 out of Minnesota. He can play. He's a swing tackle too, so they can move him around. That's a big plus. Played at left tackle the last 2 years, but I think the versatility of him being a swing tackle and having played 2 years at left tackle, and he's further along than people like Kingsley Suimata was. So I like Ursary out of Minnesota.
Well done, Kieran. I was the 4-5 odds-on favourite to be the first person to swear on the show, but you managed to beat me to it. So the bookies will be paying out on you this evening.
It was mine.
Buffalo Bills select at 30, Kieran O'Donovan. The Bills have a boatload of picks in this year's draft, so they've a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of things that they might do. They can make moves if they need to. They have the capital to do so. They don't have any areas of glaring need, but they might potentially look, I would think, to address that defense unless you have a competing view.
I do and I don't. Like, the consensus pick is Kenneth Grant's defensive tackle. 40% I think is the likelihood that they'll go with him. I'm not too sure they do this because, and Kieran will speak to this better than I would, but I believe that the defensive lineman, it's quite a deep draft in that area. So I think they might look to the secondary and either look at corner or free safety. Look, they've extended Christian Benford, but they need more competition in that position. And they brought in Dane Jackson, but they're quite thin at cornerback. And just a quick word on Damar Hamlin at free safety. I think they're kind of caught in a trap at the moment with the emotion of what happened to him. I think he's a fantastic story. I don't think he's a fantastic free safety. So I think they might look there. The other area of need I'd see is wide receiver. Look, they don't seem to have hit on Amari Cooper. He's unsigned as of yet. I think Shakir and Coleman came in and probably overachieved last year. I think they exceeded expectations, and the Bills, as an offense in general, exceeded expectations because we thought that they'd be depleted. I still think, you look at a generation quarterback like Josh Allen. I think anyone, any GM should look to give them an ultimate weapon down the field, and if they can get someone in the draft, as you said, whether they use their high number of picks to bolster maybe some kind of a trade to get a receiver high up the draft, I'm not too sure.
Is he his own worst enemy in some ways, though, Kieran, in that we saw him make so much hay with so relatively scarce resources around him last year? They were a team of no stars, quote unquote, on offense. Obviously, they'd Cook, who was doing wonders for them as well, to be fair to him. But he didn't look when play started in the regular season last year to have an array of talent in the skill positions to be thrown the ball to, and yet he did wonders.
Yeah, and that's where it's not up to him. It's up to the front office, to say, okay, yeah, he's doing more than what he needs to do. It's up to them to say, let's push it to the next level, and let's get someone that absolutely takes this team over the top. Because look, they're one of these teams that's in a Super Bowl window at the moment. As long as Josh Allen is around, he can make things happen. So it's the front office now needs to do their bit and do everything they can to maximize his talent.
Shane, what do you see the Commanders doing with the 29th pick? Playoff team, surprise package, I suppose, alongside the Denver Broncos last year. The feel-good story of the league in so many ways last year. They were fairly comprehensively beaten ultimately in the playoffs, though, which does serve as a reminder that it's far from a perfect roster, and they do still have quite a few areas of positional needs. To me, they're one of the harder teams to know, even between offense and defense, what they're likely to do with their first-round pick.
Yeah, it's a weird one. They have a lot of places that they need to improve on, but there's nothing that's really outstandingly glaring. I think when you look at teams who have a rookie quarterback who has played exceptionally well in the first season, usually teams, when they're picking in the first, second round of the draft, they rush to try and find ways to protect them, and offensive line is the pick. I don't quite see that being what the Commanders do this time around, primarily because they have to live in the same division as Saquon Barkley.
Apart from the Texans, who we'll get to, Shane, who were happy to let CJ Stroud be absolutely pummeled last year.
I didn't know the Texans had an offensive line. It definitely didn't look like they had one over the Christmas break. It was ridiculous. But we'll get onto those guys later on. In terms of the Commanders, the Commanders, I played exceptionally well. They were great at situational football. But the fact is, you're now coming into the second season where you're a bit more of a known entity and have to find ways to be more consistent. And the big area to have to improve on is run defense. They were 30th in the league against the run. So for that reason, I think they're going to start looking to those kind of trench defenders, and it's because sort of interesting as well to see throughout the free agency period, they tried to get edge rushers. They seem to try to get Khalil Mack, didn't quite work out. Try to get Joey Bosa, DeMarcus Lawrence, that didn't quite work out. So I think that if they're going to use their first round pick, they're going to use it on an edge rusher. So if we're looking around at people who might be available this side of the draft, I think Tennessee's James Pierce Jr. might be a right fit for that system. But like I said, the Commanders more than any other team, I think there's a lot of areas they could improve on. I think a lot of mock drafts are looking at potentially quarterback to be fitting in there, but I don't see them using it on offensive weapon. They need trench players more than they need skill players in the first round here.
Lads, you're competing in the private chat here to make points about the Commanders. So I'll flip a coin here, Brian, and go to you first.
They made a push on a couple of safeties in free agency, and it didn't come to fruition. Something tells me that maybe that's a position of need that they're really keen to go after. Maybe in the first round, that's somewhere that's for me. We spoke about it after the championship game that defensively in that particular game they were completely outclassed. So I imagine they're looking at a number of spots. Be interested to see what they do over the course of the entirety of the draft, how much defense they go. Maybe Kieran's going to double down on that, but that's where I'm thinking safety.
Kieran Boyle, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I have corner. I mean, we all remember what happened to Marshawn Lattimore in the playoffs and how he got smoked on a lot of the plays. This guy out of Southern California, Jalen Smith, not overly big, typical kind of corner build, 5'11", 195, but he's fast as lightning. And USC is a hotbed of talented, whether wide receivers or cornerbacks. And we're pretty sure the cornerback is one of the hardest positions on the field. So they need to get somebody. I don't think Lattimore is the answer for Washington going forward. They're going to need somebody that's going to push him in that position. I think Jalen Smith out of USC is a good pick.
There's no one leaping out in terms of the consensus draft picks there, interestingly, Kieran, for the Commanders. But Benjamin Morrison, the Notre Dame cornerback, is one player that's been linked to them. So, some of the draft boards out there are favouring a pick in the secondary.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with this draft is, and we've discussed it in the past, it's line heavy, both sides of the line, and there's a lot of talents, especially first round, late first round in corners. Not so much safety, but there's 2 to 3 standout corners for me. So it'll be very, very fun to watch where the dominoes fall.
You're still on the clock here, Kieran, with the Detroit Lions. If I was a betting man now, I'd be lumping it all on them, going for a pass rusher to pair with Aiden Hutchinson. They'll have him back. It'll be like having a new player. His injury, in no small measure, helped derail their own ambitions to win a Lombardi last year. They brought in Zadarius Smith to address a need. They've let him go now, said they can't afford him. So if they're tipping their hand at all, and it's always a mistake to read too much into what a GM says or doesn't say, because they can be trying to misdirect you, but this looks like a nailed-on one to me.
Yeah, and it's. I don't think we need to get too cute. There's a need at edge, and there's some really good edge players out there. I mean, like you said, they lost Zadarius Smith, Hutchinson with the injury. You're going to need more backup than just Zadarius Smith. You're going to need some really really strong rookies coming in to bolster that position. I like Shamar Stewart, edge rusher out of Texas A&M. Competing in the, when you're competing in the SEC, that's the gold standard of college football, and you're pitting your wits against the best players in the best conference. The only downside I would have, he's a phenomenally talented player, but when you you pile up stats and you look at somebody like Abdul Carter, who had 12 sacks last year, Shamar Stewart had 4.5 sacks, which is not a great kind of return, but it's all the other intangibles, the speed, the hand size, all these kind of things. And he brought a Texas A&M team. He was one of the standouts on an A&M team, which didn't do a lot in the SEC. Again, you got a huge amount of talent in that conference. But when you watch these games, certain players in certain positions stand out. Premium corners stand out a lot in not great teams. And somebody like Shamar Stewart, he stood out a lot with A&M. So I see him going edge, like you said, and somebody like Shamar Stewart's probably going to be – he should be available in the late first round.
Brian, Baltimore Ravens will be on the clock just before that at 27. The Ravens are the absolute masters at compensatory picks. I think they have 11 picks overall. I think they have more picks than anyone else in the draft. And they do this every year. They seem to always come in loaded with capital, which gives them great options. And they don't tend to trade up. They tend to wait for the board to come to them. What are they going to do in the first round?
Well, 11 picks allows them, you would imagine, to pick the best player available. And the last couple of years, they've had situations where they've had to go after a position of need. Wide receiver a couple of years ago, secondary last year. I'm going to be a little bit boring, it's similar to the Chiefs. I'm going to go offensive line. I think if you reflect on that divisional round loss to the the Bills. I know you can't isolate into one game. They had 3 turnovers, and when you read back on some of the reports in that game, a lot of people put it down to the offensive line kind of crumbled in that particular game, putting Lamar under pressure. I've shown out Tyler Booker from Alabama, and he's the kind of player I think that would fit in there. I think you've got a fabulous talent in Lamar, and what are you going to do? You got to keep on protecting them. And the fact that they're 11 picks kind of allows them to go in different dynamic in other rounds. So for me, maybe a slightly boring one. Maybe not what Ravens fans want to hear, but I think offensive line.
Yeah, but the Ravens do tend to do boring, right? That's one of the reasons why they're consistently so good. They do the obvious thing sometimes, and they do the boring thing sometimes. But if you look at the Eagles, who do very much the same, that's the bedrock of success for a lot of teams. The Bills probably fall into that category too. So it's often hard to call to mind the Bills pick, and then you see these guys coming out in the woodwork, and they're able to fill their secondary no matter how many players go down. The Ravens very much in that basket.
There's no storylines this offseason either. Kind of like a couple of years ago was the Lamar contract. Harbour signs the contract as head coach, securing him into the future. The team aren't that far away. I mean, we were talking about Mark Andrews dropped away from the game going into overtime or on a 2-point conversion. Who knows what would have came of that if they had went into Kansas City. Like, they obviously are looking at this, I'd imagine, and saying a few tweaks here and there, a few little players in the right position. I think we'll ultimately be back challenging for the sale, which is even going to be even more competitive next year. But it's good to be in a position where there's not a lot of people talking about you for all the wrong reasons. It's all about the right reasons for the Ravens. It's a case of tweaking a team and they can go forward.
Kieran O'Donovan, you might argue in a similar boat are the Los Angeles Rams, who got closer than anyone did, as we've said many times this offseason, to taking out the Eagles in the playoffs, had their shot and couldn't quite get over the line. The big departure this year was Cooper Kupp. We had a great chat with Jordan Rodrigue of The Athletic a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about what a pivotal and foundational piece in Sean McVay's offense Kupp was. So the consensus number one pick for our first round pick rather for the Rams is Isaiah Bond, the Alabama wide receiver. Do you see them going in that direction, or maybe taking something slightly more exotic? Because there has been talk, and again, you don't know what to believe and what not to believe when GM starts spouting at this time of year, because fake news can be the order of the day. But they have been linked with a move maybe for Jalen Milroe, the quarterback.
Okay, I haven't heard that, but look, I was going to start off and say if we're giving Howie Roseman the flowers, we may add Les Snead to that, because he's had a really successful few years as well in terms of draft success. Jared Verse was a big hit last year. He's an outside linebacker. They do have a need at inside linebacker, having moved on from two linebackers, which, I suppose they didn't get the production that they would have hoped this year. I do think they may go receiver, but harping back then to Jordan Rodrigue's interview, I think they may look at a tight end if the likes of a Colston Loveland falls to them. Like Jordan Rodrigue, I went into this a couple of weeks ago. She talked about and she kind of educated us on the importance of Cooper Kupp and what he did in that. She called it the 11.5 personnel, where he was almost like a mini tight end on the field. Like, Devontae Adams improves the receiving core, I think, undoubtedly, because you kind of that was declining slightly in Cooper Kupp in terms of what he was able to achieve receiving wise. However, I don't think Devontae Adams is going to do the things in the trenches that Cooper Kupp does. Tyler Higbee came back off an MCL and ACL tear last year. He did improve their tight end room towards the end of the season, but you can't trust him to be the go-to. So, as I said, if a Colston Lovelander or another, and again, it's seemingly a good tight end draft class, I think they might look to the tight end to bolster that, run block, pass block, that kind of versatile receiver.
Somewhere Jordan Rodrigue is smiling, Kieran, at you using the 11.5 personnel line. I know she's been hoping that one will catch on, and you're keeping the flame alive there. Kieran Boyle, you wanted to make a point on the Rams.
Quick one on the Rams. Again, not getting too cute and looking at positions of need and who's the strongest player and who's the best one available. There's a kid, Siobhan Revell, out of East Carolina University. Great story. I mean, this is a kid that was working at Amazon, was just following his dreams. COVID hit, and he was just playing ball wherever he could. Ended up at East Carolina University. He's a kind of different to the kind of your regular standard corner. He's a little bit taller, 6'2", a little bit heavier, almost 200 pounds. But he's got that hunger. I had a friend that went to ECU, so I always get a chance to watch ECU games, and he was definitely a standout. I like him. Again, corner is a position of need for them. You think of Achille Witherspoon and Darius Williams. If anything happens to those guys, where's the backup for that? And you gotta feed that corner position, because it's vital with all these stud wide receivers that are floating around the NFL.
Speaking about being fed, it's as good a time as any to mention that we'll be feeding you with content on the night of the first round of the draft. We have a live show following up on our successful live show last year from Cork. This year we're coming from Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. Really looking forward to that one. Even Kieran O'Donovan will be making the trip up from the real capital to spend the night with us, and blessed are we. I say us. Fortunately, I won't be present. I'll have to watch it from somewhere else, but I'm sure it'll be an absolute banger. Really looking forward to that show, and we'll be live throughout the first round as we were last year. It's a night for the Red Bull, so we'll be making sure we bring you right through from picks 1 straight through to 32. We're going in the opposite direction tonight, though, as we fall to 25. Shane, and the Houston Texans, we mentioned their porous offensive line that saw poor CJ Stroud on his ass 54 times last year, beaten only by Caleb Williams, who got decked 68 times with that even more porous Swiss cheese Bears offensive line.
Firstly, I will not be on the Red Bull. I'm more of a cup of tea man, by the way. That's my way to sort of keep going, keep plowing the tea in, and that gets me through the whole draft night. And by the time we reached, the 25th pick, when the Texans are coming through, I will be sitting back and wondering, are they actually going to start doing something interesting, maybe going for a wide receiver? Because I think, similar to Baltimore, the Texans are a team who could really do with another weapon, but they will probably end up going for somebody who is that more traditional kind of, I guess, more boring pick. The problem with the Texans, though, is that unlike Baltimore, is they really need those boring players. If it was possible to pick 3 offensive linemen with 1 pick, they will take it, and that is the position they are in. The strategy for the Texans for this draft is incredibly simple. Sit and wait, and whoever the best offensive tackle is in particular who falls in line, just take him. And I think by the time we'll be sitting here, there's a couple of guys who ended up going there. I reckon Josh Sims from Ohio State seems to be a decent fit for the system. Was also a national champion, of course. Let's not forget, but is coming in, I think, on a nice run of form. If he's the best guy that's going to be sitting on the deck by the time it falls down to the Texans, I think that's the guy they're going to go to. But there is a good chance that they're sitting there. Maybe the offensive lineman isn't falling in the way they'd like to. I don't think they're in a position to trade out, but they might end up going for a wide receiver and surprising us, despite the fact that, as we said, the offensive line, particularly the tail end of last season, was just atrocious. And it was a big reason why the Texans, even though, yes, they got their playoff win, never really looked like they could live up to the potential that they showed themselves to have the previous season. So they really need to find an offensive tackle, and quick. But they could end up going for the skills player who scores the touchdowns, whatever CJ Stroud isn't getting attacked. So it'll be interesting to see that one when the night comes.
Well, that brings us to the end of the first half of this night's draft preview. We start the second half with a look, Kieran Boyle, at the Minnesota Vikings, who will not have the most extensive draft board in Green Bay because they've only got 4 picks. What are they going to do with their all-important first-round pick?
Well, a very important development that happened a couple of days ago. Garrett Bradbury, the starting center, got moved to the Pats. So there we go. O-line is the most important spot. And this guy called Jake Majors with Texas had a good season, 4-year starter. But what sets him apart is kind of leadership ability and leadership qualities. Think of a kind of a Tyler Warren on the field, same kind of build. I mean, same kind of mental makeup. And what I've seen is, GMs and coaches really like that leadership ability. Maybe a little undersized. He's 315 for a center. You want somebody a little bit more than that. I'm sure he'll bulk up once he gets drafted, whether it's the first or whether it's in the second. But I like him at this pick for the Vikings. It's a position of need, and they've got to plug up that hole. They've got to use that position. So. He's a 4-year starter, durability, and again that leadership quality that he has is going to bring a lot to the Vikings. I like Majors.
What are they doing in Texas, letting that guy hover at 315? I thought guys down there were country fed. Let a guy get drafted in the NFL at 315. That's light.
Well, you know what? There's college light and there's NFL light. He'll find 20 or 30 pounds real quick, so I wouldn't worry about that. But good hands. I mean, I've done a lot of. I've seen a lot of good O linemen around. I used to coach O line with little kids, and it's the hand position. And when you start with that, it's your hand position, it's your feet work, and that's what it all starts with. If you've got those tangibles, then that's you build it from there. And he's Texas was a great team last year, got into the playoffs, and he was primarily keeping Quinn Ewers upright, being able to identify those blitzes that were coming down. So I like him.
Right, Kieran O'Donovan, your beloved Packers up at 23. Brian Gutekunst was just addressing the idea of whether he would or wouldn't be inclined to go for wide receiver in the first round, which again we take with a large dose of salt. He said there's no reason why he wouldn't. But the Packers tend to go defense in the first round, much to Aaron Rodgers' chagrin when he was the quarterback there. They never ever drafted anyone to help him in his esteemed view. And on that point, at least, he was, in fairness, right. But for even a stop clock tells the right time twice a day. What do you think the Packers will do with that pick, though? Will they go offense, or will they do what they traditionally do and get the best defensive player available at 23?
I think whatever they do, they need a hit, because I looked at a study from a company there last week who ranked the Packers as the worst drafting team over the last 10 years, and that factored in Pro Bowlers, All-Pro, Super Bowl winners, just individual achievements and team achievements. So they need a hit, and if they want to push on and be a contender like they reckon they are, they need someone to really make an immediate impact, whatever the position. You're looking at edge rusher and pass rusher, cornerback, and receiver. They're the three that I think it's unanimous that they'll go for one of those three. I spoke to Matt Schneidman a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about the defensive line. They've made a personnel change. DeMarcus Covington has come into the defensive line, and there's reason to believe that they possibly have the players in the building. There's a lot of focus on Lucas Van Ness and Rashawn Gary as two guys who need to step up this season, and Matt LaFleur is confident that those guys can make the jump. Reading between the lines as to what's being said in Green Bay, I don't think they're going to. I think they may look elsewhere. Then you've got the Jair Alexander situation and what they're going to do with him. He's got a fractious relationship with Matt LaFleur, and that's pretty. It's pretty common knowledge at the moment. He's undoubtedly he's a shutdown corner. He's an all-pro. Absolutely, he's a class cornerback when he's on the field. But that, again, his fitness is an issue. So they brought in Nate Hobbs, but in that position. But whether they keep Alexander or move on from him, I think that determines, or whether they're planning to keep him or move on from him, that determines whether they go corner with the first pick. And if not, then you're looking at receiver. And I know it would be ironic if they went receiver first round post Aaron Rodgers era, short with him not long out of the building. Every year we were screaming for Brian Gutekunst to add a weapon to keep Aaron Rodgers happy. But there is a lot of logic to it, because they've got a lot of guys who are going to create a cap issue the following season. So you're going to have a lot of these guys, Wicks, Reed, Dobbs, Watson, their contracts are all going to come up for renewal. There's going to be a cap issue if they don't spread that out. They may need to move on from one or two guys the following season. So I actually think a receiver may be the logical choice. I know people say it's the sexy choice, but I think it genuinely might be the logical choice. And I think they're a little bit caught in limbo with Christian Watson as well. His fitness has really hurt them, because he didn't even stay on the field enough to get to garner any bit of trade interest. There's no team is going to look at possibly trading for him until he gets back on the field, and that's not going to be till later on in the season. So if the right receiver falls to him, to the Packers, I think they may actually go and do it.
A team that did draft a receiver in the first round last year, Brian, was the Chargers, who some people expect might repeat the trick again this year to have somebody to pair with Lad McConkey. Equally, though, they do have holes that they might want to address on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, but I'm going to stick on the offensive side. I think if Kieran O'Donovan, his GM manager with the Rams there, wants to make a trade to get Colson Loveland, this is the landing spot, because Jim Harbaugh, for me, did his utmost last year to kind of get guys in from Michigan that I knew and trusted from their championship year, and I think this is a natural fit. He brought in Tyler Conklin in the offseason, but with all due respect to his days with the Jets, he's not at that caliber. I think this is a huge opportunity to bring in a player, another great weapon for Herbert. And we saw in the playoffs that ultimately, come that game, they needed weapons to get the job done. They had opportunities in that game where they were slow off the mark. They were taking field goals, more production offense that day. I think he's a landing spot. I'd actually love to see what Kieran Boyles thinks of this one, because two of us have picked this tight end to be going late round, but he's one that strikes me as Jim Harbaugh will want to find someone. He has a comfort blanket with Connor. It strikes me as the kind of player to go after.
Kieran, but tight ends are kind of sexy picks in the first round these days, because we've seen some, highlighted by Brock Bowers last year and Sam Laporte the year before that, really come in and make an instant impact. Could they go there?
Yeah, like Brian said, I think it makes perfect sense. Harbaugh knows everything about him. He won the national title with him in 23. He's a stud. I've spoken about him a lot in the past. I think along with Warren, those two are the standout. There's another guy, Harold Fannin, may go second round, but I think those two are the top two tight ends, and I think it makes perfect sense for Loveland to go to the Chargers. Again, they need a spark. It's you think Sam Laporta with this guy, he's just got great ability. The only again with tight ends these days, the old school tight ends were great, blockers and things like that. That's not so much an issue with tight ends right now. Tight ends are an extension of wide receivers, and he's got great hands, great feet, great ability, great size. I mean, he's 6'5". He's not quite as tall as Warren, who's 6'7", but 245, can move around. He's light and fast. He's a great talent, and I think it'd be a great fit for the Chargers. And the fact that Harbaugh has got a relationship with him will only cement that. The only other thing I would say about the Chargers is they need it, like pretty much every team in the league. He needs help with the O-line, keeping Herbert upright, Donovan Jackson, maybe something like that. But I think Loveland makes too much sense.
Shane, at 21, the Pittsburgh Steelers are picking. There'll be a lot of Irish interest in that, obviously, because we'd like to see whoever they pick playing here in Croke Park in September. This is a very interesting pick, though, regardless of whether you're looking at it with Irish eyes, because it's kind of unclear as to what the Steelers might do here. And they've been throwing out the signal flares, maybe misinformation again, suggesting that they like the look maybe of one of the quarterbacks in the draft, and they were kind of making noises at the owners' meeting to the effect that maybe people are sleeping on this class of quarterbacks, which could be the kind of move that you make, or what you say if you want somebody to try and trade up because they're looking to grab a quarterback that they worry that you might select otherwise or might come off the board. What do you see them do?
I think the Steelers by far is the most interesting pick of this draft because there's about 40 different things they could do. I would be shocked if they're picking at 21. I think there's a really good chance they might try to find a way to move up the board and even try to take Shedeur off the board. It just seems like they're waiting too long for Aaron Rodgers and don't fully have a quarterback plan. This isn't a team that's in a rebuild. This is a team that is consistently making the playoffs, has a lot of pretty good players on there, can really do something in the postseason. But if they're sitting here not with a run game that needs improvement, with a quarterback room which has got a complete turnover after last season, and last season was effectively a shot to nothing. They're in a situation now where they need to get a deal done, and they haven't got a deal done. So I think that one way or another, they're going to find a way to get a quarterback out of this draft class, which is interesting because most of the mock drafts, the consensus is they're going to go for wide receiver, potentially defensive tackle. I think that's nuts. They need a quarterback or a running back, and I have a funny feeling that they're going to use their picks in the first two rounds to address those two positions. If I was on my Quip bet account, I would bet that they would at least be trying to find a way to move up to get Shedeur Sanders. But if they're sticking here, I think they're going with Jackson Dart. The Steelers aren't a team that invites QBs in willy-nilly. I think they're very selective about who they invite into their facility, more so than most organizations. They met with Jackson Dart a couple of days ago. Noise from there seems like they are relatively happy now. Maybe, like you said, that could be a negotiation tactic and how to deal with the rest of the league. But to be honest with you, how long this so-called Aaron Rodgers situation has dragged on really makes you think that either way, they need to make a punt for a quarterback, not in the second, not in the third, not in the fourth round, but try to get it done as early as they can and get the best one that is available to them. And if they're picking in the 21st in the draft, I think Jackson Dart will be the best available to them, unless he ends up going earlier, which I don't really foresee happening. So look, I'd be interested to see what everybody else thinks of this, because the Steelers aren't always the type of team who will go for the slightly crazy pick or sort of go in for a quarterback at a time when they don't necessarily need to. I think there is a lot of wisdom in picking a defensive tackle and waiting out another year to try and fix their quarterback situation. But I just can't see them exiting this first round without a quarterback in their room, because Mason Rudolph isn't doing the job for you this season. He just isn't.
Kieran O'Donovan, you wanted to make a point on the Steelers.
Yeah, just look, I was talking to Chris Adamski the other day, writer for the Steelers, and we were talking about the fans and versus the ownership. The ownership are very slow to do anything dramatic, and tradition is hugely important in the within the Rooney family. The fans are certainly feeling like the Steelers are in limbo and they need to do something dramatic to get, whether it's an absolute tank of a season or a blockbuster move. And I think the blockbuster move that might possibly be worth even thinking about or looking into it is a TJ Watt trade. I know it sounds extremely drastic, but it has been the case before where these kind of trades have helped to get a team over the line or get a team moving in a hurry. You look back at the Cowboys trade. What's his name? Herschel Walker. And I know it's a long way back, but like it's important to note as well that the Steelers don't have a second round pick. So if they don't take a quarterback in the first round, they're going, they're all the way to the third round, and I think they're just that team they're so far off making that push to being a contender, and they're not weak enough to say that it's a rebuild that needs a couple of years to get going. I think the possibility even of a discussion around the TJ Watt trade would be interesting, if at the very least.
Kieran Boyle, what did you want to share with us on the Steelers?
Again, thinking, just looking along the patterns of what may fall. Najee Harris is gone. He talks some smack about the organization on the way out the door. They've got to establish the run. There's a kid, Ohio State, Trevion Henderson, who along with Quinshon Judkins, each had 1,000 yards. Kind of a thunder and lightning tandem they had there in Ohio State. 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Just a really, really good talent. And they need someone to excite the crowd. They need someone, they need a really kind of premier running back. And it's all about, who's the best available. We say that all the time. Well, at running back at that position, Genty will be gone. And Trevion Henderson might good size, 5'10", low center of gravity. But he's also good at pass protection too. So he's got the intangibles. He's got the other skills as well as being able to run. And those 1,000 yards can be added on real quick when you tack on to the 5, 6, 7 games in the NFL. 10 rushing touchdowns last year. He's got a boatload of talent. And I think it makes sense for the Steelers.
And the Giants, Brian, will long since have taken Scadaboo off the board by that stage as well, so he won't be available. What did you want to? You had the thoughts around a potential trade, mate?
Yeah, well, it's kind of 2 points which the guys have made. So like Shane is talking about the reality whether they're going to be there at 21 to pick, and Kieran rightly calls out there's no second round pick because they've given that away to get Metcalf in. The Falcons have 5 picks and they're picking at 15. For me, they're the landing spot for some team that's going to move up for the quarterback. And ultimately, I think it's going to be too rich for the Steelers to get up. There's other teams in much better positions to acquire that selection at 15 to get up the board, including the Giants. The Giants have 2 third-round picks. Like they could be giving that up along with a second if they need to move back up. I just think for the Steelers to get up, I just don't see how it plays out that way. I think ultimately, if Jackson Dart does fall into that lap of 21, fine, yeah, absolutely. It makes total sense. But I just don't see a scenario. You just don't have enough capital to get up where other teams are going to come chasing. And maybe the Falcons, who are a team needy of picks, with only 5 selections on the night, they're going to take what's best for them, not what the Steelers want.
Kieran Boyle, the Denver Broncos are on the clock at 20. Colston Loveland is actually the consensus pick here, or 60% of the mock drafts have him going to the Broncos. A player we've already talked about, if he was still on the board, going a bit lower down, maybe to the Chargers. What do you think that they will do though to bolster this playoff team? You would think they may be favouring another weapon for Bo Nix.
Yeah, I've been kind of going back and forth on whether they're going to take a running back or wide receiver. I mean, they lost Javonte Williams. The running back room now is Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime, which is not exactly setting the world on fire. So they definitely need a running back. I was thinking about maybe Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina, but I think what they're going to end up doing is taking the first we're starting to get into the premier kind of wide receivers at this stage. Now we're getting midpoint of the first round. Matthew Golden out of Texas, 9 touchdowns in 24. What sets him apart is his yards after catch, averages 17 yards after catch, which is, that just gets GMs watering at the mouth. He's a phenomenal talent. If you look back at the game against Arizona State in the playoffs, he played phenomenally, just great reach. And it's the speed. It's not only that, it's the toughness to get the yards after catch. Fast as lightning, ran a 4.29 40. We can say what we want about the combine and its merits, but this is an absolute stud. This is probably I want to say this could flip flop between the number 2 and number 3 wide receiver in the draft. Texas is a school that has lately been churning out just absolute monsters in the wide receiver room. I mean, we had Xavier Worthy coming out last year, but I really think that the bigger need for I mean, that they can get Broncos could get a running back further back in the second, third round, or even further back. But somebody like Matthew Golden, if he presents in the draft, they've got to pull the trigger on him. Just a great talent.
Brian, the Buccaneers pick at 19. Looking like they probably need to bolster the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, Levante David out the door there. So they got gaps to fill. Jihad Campbell, the Alabama linebacker, is the 60% consensus mock favorite there.
Didn't know that, Connor, but he's the name I have on the board. But again, it's more around the fact that one, David is obviously no longer there. He's such a key piece of the jigsaw for so long. Excuse me. And we spoke over the course of the last couple of years about the fact that we shouldn't be surprised that the Bucs do so well, because they kept majority of those players on defense that were there involved in that great Super Bowl victory against the Chiefs, and over the course of that particular playoff run, how well they did. And we always touched on the experience, but that experience has gone out the door in a number of positions. So I think they're going to have to regenerate in a way to get this team younger on defense and still put a stellar team on the field, because this division every year we say is up for grabs, and the Falcons and the Saints will want to come calling again this year. Campbell is the one I had. I thought he fits the mold of a linebacker that come in and similarities to David's traits and put them back in a position. We've seen Cansey over the course of the last few years being so productive. We had him on the show a couple of years ago. Strikes me as the kind of player to go after, but he has had his own injuries. So, we see on draft time, sometimes teams swerve a player. Ultimately, they realize a year later it was the wrong decision, but he has had injury concerns. So that will be interesting to see if he falls down there. If he's not, I'd imagine he's gone by 15. Kieran Donovan,
the Seattle Seahawks, good to see that you're still here, are picking at 18. John Schneider, their GM, is another one who's been making some interesting comments. He's been talking up the QB class as well. They brought in Sam Darnold, obviously, and they still have Drew Lock on the books in Seattle after the departure of Geno Smith to the Raiders. But wouldn't be outlandish if they were to go for depending on whether he's still there or not, a Jalen Milroe or a Shock is the other guy out of Louisville, I think, that's been talked up and has been having a couple of top 30 visits. Outside of that, though, what might they do you think?
But I think if there's any hope that Sam Darnold is going to be the quarterback he was last year, I think going for a quarterback would be a bit of a wasted pick, because they have greater needs than that. I listened to Kieran describe Matthew Golden, and how the Seahawks would love to draft an over-the-top wide receiver like that to replace the loss of DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett. But unfortunately for them, I don't think they have the luxury of even considering that, because we call them the Houston Texans of the NFC. Their offensive line is just that. It's just that porous. It's the worst offensive line in the NFC by a considerable margin. So I think that's just where they're going. I think it's as simple as that.
The intriguing in-division trade rumor that's been doing the rounds, though, is that, and this plays into why Schneider said what he did, that the Rams might be in the market to potentially draft their quarterback of the future at they're not going to get him probably at 26, but if they could trade up to 18, Seahawks trade back, that's one that maybe writes itself. So we'll see what they do, but yeah, just to put a bit of flesh on those bones, that's one thing to watch out for on draft night.
Just on the offensive line as well. I don't know how many times we're after mentioning offensive line picks as boring picks. You had Matt Schlareth on there a few weeks ago, and I hope he's not listening tonight, because I heard him describe offensive line as the sexiest picks you could make in the draft, and he really got into the intricacies of it again during the week. So he says when he hears about offensive linemen, I think he said something like he puts the sock on the door and locks it. So that's his take on it. So I'd be careful about what we call a boring pick versus a sexy pick.
Good stuff. Shane, the Bengals are drafting at 17. They have over 50% of their salary cap, as we've talked about, devoted to just 4 players. They're wildly overweight on 4 players in comparison to where most NFL teams are at. So to put it mildly, they need to have a good draft. Lou Anarumo, as we know, was shipped out the door for the defensive shortcomings last year, while the offense largely trucked along, certainly on the back half of the season, looking like one of the better units in the league and able to put up points even on some of the better defenses, underlined by the way they played against the Baltimore Ravens in their 2 matchups. But it does look like they'll go on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, it is interesting to see that a lot of mock drafts for this have them going for wide receivers, which, you know, is a complete waste considering all of the money they're spending on the stars that they're already keeping on their team. And look, we've said it so many times with the Bengals, a fantastic team ruined by the fact that the defense could not get things done in big game moments. What you're really looking for is a big game player, particularly in the safety position. I think that's the key area that they need to look at. So two guys I'm looking at here. Either, if he's still available, Malachi Starks, and he's the exact right kind of character that Cincinnati need in the locker room. He plays for Georgia. He seems like he's the right kind of person who is a leader. He always gets things done in big game moments. So what is probably going to happen is that Xavier Watts, safety at Notre Dame, is going to end up being put there because, well, the defensive coordinator now for Cincinnati was the defensive coordinator over for most of Xavier Watts' career at Notre Dame, Al Golden. So, you know, it kind of makes sense for them to keep that, to keep their rapport going, because there is a bit of rebuild needed on the defensive side of the ball, and they're going to have to do it on a shoestring budget because they spent so much money on the talent, as you said there. I think I have a funny feeling that the Bengals, in order to try and find a way to make this work, considering the financial strains that have put themselves in, they're going to try and make picks that is comfortable with the coaches and the situation that they already have, which is why Xavier Watts of Notre Dame coming over makes a hell of a lot of sense from their point of view.
Well, like White Lotus, you're going to have to wait another week to find out how it ends, because we got the picks from 16-1 coming up on Easter Monday, this day next week, for those of you watching us live. And thanks very much to everyone who's been watching along with us. Thanks also if you're listening back to the podcast, and do remember to like and subscribe wherever you find the Irish NFL Show if you like what you hear. We'll be back with you very soon.